I hope you can hear us. Very good. Right. Oh, we have thanks. So the way we had planned and talked about this session was that we had 3 questions. Again, I think I also copied you in those emails. We have 3 questions that I would like to throw to each of the actors. Is Francis online? And can he hear us? Can he speak? Okay. Francis, can you? Yes. Okay. He said yes. So there are 3 questions that I'm going to provide our panelists, our speakers here today. And the floor is open. It's an informal session. Please feel free to chip in, to comment, to suggest, or give their views. Hello, Francis.
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay. Good. You can hear us.
Sorry, the sound is not clear.
Can you hear me?
Are we? Yes. Are we introducing ourselves?
We can hear you. Yes, we can see you. We can hear you. But can you hear us?
Yes. No. Yes.
Okay. Good. So, Francis, what I was telling our audience here is that we have 3 questions that we have for all the panelists. We have the other 3 panelists here with us. Richard Mahapatra from Down to Earth, Managing Editor, Down to Earth India. We have Helen here from the Standard Group, and we have Godfrey from Science, and we have you. So let me begin because we are already a little sort of beyond this time. So let me so the first question, Richard, I think the first question I'll address you, and then maybe after that, Godfrey and Francis can chip in, because it's talking about Africa and India. So my first question is, how adequate has been the media coverage in Africa and India of the most pressing existential threat, climate emergency, climate change? What are the issues for media to deal with, and what challenges are there in mainstreaming the coverage? Please, I also want all of you to also chip in as and when you want to. Please don't hesitate to interrupt me or one of the panelists if you have any suggestions, any comments. So just to repeat the question: how adequate has been the media coverage in Africa and India of the most pressing existential threat that we have today, climate change, the climate crisis, the climate emergency? What are the issues for media to deal with, and what challenges are there in mainstreaming the coverage? So from Richard, we will hear a little bit about what's happening in India, and then we can request the 2 of you and Francis to chip in. Yes.
Thank you, Swapana. Good morning. I think this is a very valid self-question to all of us. Is it adequate? Given our experience and from Indian media side, our coverage, I can say it's adequate in a very reactive manner. If there is a big cyclone, a flood, a drought, anomalies in some weather conditions, we do report. And we report it plenty. But climate change as a subject, as an existential threat, as a planetary, emergency, the way we should report, that has not been adequate. So when I say whether it's adequate or not, it's in terms of not just the number of stories or the kind of coverage, but also understanding the issue and looking at the climate in every story that happens. So I can say that, we do very much reactive reportage to the crisis. We don't actually put together all our developments into the wider framework of climate change. Then why do we actually report on climate change? If it's a planetary issue, if it's happening, then emergency we don't find it reporting, saying that it could be an existential, issue for all of us. To sum it up, I think our coverage, not number-wise or geography spread-wise, but in understanding the crisis and going into its nuances and its impact, socio-economic, cultural, social, environmental, that has not been done. So all these impacts people are already experiencing.
Thank you. Let me also add here, when we are talking about India, there are two very clear streams of news and feature publications that we can perhaps talk to. One is the mainstream media, and what Richard has been saying is quite true of the mainstream media, as well as the other one, which is our vernacular and regional media. India has a host of languages, and we have very vibrant media in all of these languages. But what my experience tells me is there is a definite lack of exposure when it comes to the regional media, the vernacular media. They do not have access to information because of language issues, of course, and because of the way that they are spread in very different parts of the country, far from areas. So that's the scenario, and what Richard has been talking about is largely true of both. They should have issues there. Can I now ask Ellen if you can sort of comment on this and give us some insights? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Kenya is an interesting case. As we all agree, climate change is the biggest threat that we are facing currently. And if you look at our reportage and you look at the threat that we are facing, there's a mismatch. For instance, if you look at the Kenyan Daily today, as opposed to bring an issue, you not even today, the past week or even the past month, you think that we're in an election mode. It's Raila, it's Ruto, it's all over the same political situation over and over again. Even as they're discussing all these things, there's El Nino that is coming up, and it is a threat. The experts have warned, but it does not find itself on page one. So I can say, Kenya, the Kenyan media, we are not there yet, although newsrooms and editors have realized it is a serious issue and it needs to be given the prominence it deserves. Environment stories are still competing with politics, entertainment, and sports. So you find if there's a political story, chances are high it will get the first page as opposed to an environment story. So from where I sit, I can confidently say, unless there is a global event like COP that is coming up, COP28 or Africa Climate Summit, it is rare you find an environment story on page one. The times that you find itself on page one is during global events like the Africa Summit. Like during that period, most of the dailies were covering climate. So Nation, Standard, those are the two big papers. The stories were just on climate. That was 1 week during that period. After that, we have switched back to factory settings. It is politics after politics after politics. And climate change is the most serious issue. Drought, crop yields, and all these things are being felt on the ground. So I would say there's still a mismatch, and there's still a lot to be done in terms of coverage. Thank you.
Can I ask Yeah, thank you, Helen. Can I now go to Francis and get his opinion on this particular question and then come back to Godfrey? And then after that, we can sum it up. Yes, Francis, please.
Thank you. Unfortunately, reception this side is not clear when you're asking the question, but I guess it's the same question that the rest of the team have been answering. I think the situation is not any different from that of Kenya, what the lady in the middle has shared. We have a lot of political reporting. In Uganda, like she said, newspapers like New Vision and Monitor sometimes try. Right now, we have our Sunday Vision newspaper. It has a pull-out on climate change, but that pull-out came as a result of funding we got from a non-profit organization from Europe. That's how we started it. I don't know whether it will be sustained after that funding has ended. In general, newspapers have tried, but still they have not done as we would have expected them. In Uganda, like 70% of the population gets its news from radios. Unfortunately, radios have not, if I'm to rate them, I would give them like 0.1% when it comes to climate change reporting and environment reporting. They have not done well. And I think the problem is because most of our radio stations have no serious newsrooms. They basically depend on information from newspapers and social media because they don't have resources. Likewise, newspapers revenue resources are reducing and newspapers are now cutting on staff. That has caused a problem. Like she said, when there are global meetings on climate change, you see newspapers picking up stories on climate change, on environment. But when the meetings have ended, that reporting on climate change reduces. Because of the market-driven approach that like 99% of Ugandan media are using, we basically produce or publish news that is to entice the public to buy our newspapers. And that's why you find a lot of political reporting, a lot of celebrity reporting, gospel in entertainment. And that has affected science reporting and climate change reporting in Uganda. So we are still doing badly. Anything?
Right. So what I'm going to do is now I can request Godfrey to comment on this particular question, and then I can, if I can, come back to all of you to chip in. Godfrey.
Thank you, Supanyo. Now, I'm going to look at this question in three perspectives. One, in terms of whether the coverage is really adequate. I was looking at a study, a 2010 study, that was done by Reuters, covering Africa. There's a case study of Nigeria and South Africa. And the findings, that was 13 years ago. And they are still like the same day. In Nigeria, for example, it was that 42% of climate change stories, were tied to events. In South Africa, it was 70% tied to events. So, and the stories that were initiated by journalists themselves were just about 13% in Nigeria. In South Africa, it was even lower. And the situation has not really changed much even today. We still wait for events. We still wait for COP. We still wait for climate summit and such little events, so that we can get these stories out. But one of the, I think one of the biggest challenges from this study that
the editors that were interviewed, there was a consensus that climate change is not a genuine story. Across the board. Because of the complexities that involve most editors glorying and understand. Sometimes you give an editor a story, they ask, what is this story about? Why is it important? We in Kenya, for example, a few months ago, there was a very senior editor. When I was taking the newsroom, we were trying to come up with a section on climate change in the newspaper. And this very senior editor asked, who cares about environment stories? That was busy actually. So we still, I think we still have a long way to go. Despite the fact that our media space in Africa has really grown. In Kenya, we have so many community radio stations, so many of them, that reach to the ground, to the very ordinary people. But it's their language that they can relate to. We have the language to report the climate change in a way that they can relate to and understand. If, for example, in my vernacular, group and there's a radio station and then we want to report about adaptation, mitigation. What is that in that language? How will my grandmother understand what that means? I think that is where the gap still lies. That we're still using these terms that make no much sense to the ordinary people. It only makes sense in big contexts. Talk about greenwashing, carbon market. What is carbon market to my grandmother whose vegetables are not doing so well because of droughts, for example? What does greenwashing mean? What does carbon market mean to a pastoralist who has lost 100 livestock in northern Kenya because of failed rains for several years? So if we can get these stories more relatable, I think that's the gap.
Yeah, amazing insight. Thank you. Can I now pass on the mic to anybody who would want to comment? Vincent, you want to talk about what is happening in Nigeria?
Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. Talking like the last speaker said, we have a very serious problem. And climate change issues and environment issues are hardly getting any equal attention in Nigeria. Even though we are in the heart and in the middle of a disaster. If you've been following events in Nigeria in the last 10 years, you agree with me that we are beginning to see a shift that is putting the lives of people in danger, and we are losing by the day. I'll give you an example. In 2012, we had what we thought was the worst flood disaster in Nigeria. We lost 603 persons, many properties were destroyed, farms, about 500,000 hectares of land were washed away. And then people just, in the middle of the night, they found themselves on top of water somehow. And then we were just reporting events, oh, there was flood here, and nobody could connect the issue. And then 10 years later, 2022, we were again, the pages of the paper floods keep them here, and that is the only time climate issues are reported, merely reported. And I agree with that study. As someone who has been in the media space for over 10 years, I agree. And I even think they have helped us a lot to put it at that point in time. I'm even ready to go. Because again, I think it is a way also that we tell the story that makes editors to actually ignore us. Because if we're not connecting the issues, if we're not really painting a picture, just like when I was at the university, my teacher said so. He's a blind man. He's a blind man. And he said, when you write something, he said, please make me see. He wants to see, but he can't He will ask you to read it aloud. He wants to see. I think that is the way we need to tell this. In a way, because sometimes, those in the policy corridor, sometimes they go to meetings, they sit down there, and that's all. We really need to bring this closer to people, so they really understand this. Now, when Richard was talking about landfill and all the waste issues, I was just looking at Lagos. And the Nigerian I know, if I take you to a place called Yanapaja in Lagos, I don't think you would think that you will be wheeled out of the coffin out of that place. And yet people are living there. The way the city, I don't know. And nobody is connecting it to all the issues. We have Lassa fever. Now in Abuja, we had another because the Georgia don't even know how to master. And the figure that people are dying. Nobody is connecting this to all the problems that we have. There was an issue I saw recently, very close to cemetery. You have also an erosion putting deep into the cemetery. You can imagine, and all of this thing also ends up in a village where people bring the animals together. All of these things, we are not people connecting the issues. These are problems. And this is also the reason why, we battle with one outbreak of disease, one outbreak of this. And we are not, we wait until it is called here. And another thing I realized is that even for some of us who really write about climate change issues, about environment issues, we really have an understanding of the issues. And those things, they interpret on the variables that can really bring the issue home to understand what we are really dealing with. Because if I don't know much about climate change, you don't expect that I'm going to write a very informative and very powerful article that can set agenda or trigger conversation in any political space. So, but thank God, people like Mesha can be doing good work in terms of training, building the capacity of people with as far as climate change is doing good. And I think that it has helped a lot. But what we need to do more is to find an innovative way of telling the story in such a way that happening with such a story. No. When you tie those stories to what is happening and to people who are being affected, obviously those stories, editors will not take that. There was a story I did some time ago, and I went to a village and then I stumbled in a secondary school. That school was established 8 years, but had no classroom. So the principal's office is in under the tree, and so when I told that story, it triggered conversation even at the state level. And you will see blame again, this one is blaming the other, how could you do that? See the way we are disgraced, But I'm happy that it has really got the attention. And even the editor, when he saw the story, said, I like that. The first thing, for the first time, I need to say, I like the way you humanize that story. I mean, this is fun. This is the way we need to think about climate. And Nigeria, for instance, if you go to northern fringes of Nigeria, along with border with Niger and all of that, you will see that desert encroachment is eating into the country. Rainfall is becoming shorter. Farmers used to predict when the rain will come and it will go. Now they don't even understand anything at all. They are so confused when to plant, when not to plant, and we are not even helping them with any. If you come close to Abuja now, there is a thriving charcoal market. Then go to the outskirts of the city, you will see the numbers of trees that are going down. And in fact, FAO said that the rate of deforestation in Nigeria is the highest in the world. We are not even telling the story. We don't care. Every evening you see tons and tons of charcoal coming to Abuja because people are looking for cheaper way to. But are we not also putting our future in jeopardy? I think that's also a critical question. So we really, it's a serious issue. And the story is the same across Africa, but you are doing better. To be frank, Kenya, they are doing better than you. Really, politics has taken over. You know, each time there is a small thing in politics, and you see people will continue to script on the whole of it. Sometimes even creating problems that are even not existent at all. You know, setting politicians against themselves. I think the real issue is just we're living with it. More people are dying. We're losing our money. In fact, our productivity is going down. Because I just got the report earlier here of rice farmers suffering because the rain is just sudden inflation of rain, and then all the people who borrowed money into rice production are now thinking of what they do with banks. They run away from their villages and all of that. So I think climate change is a serious issue. We should find a way of innovating the school in a way that editors will not be able. If they are blind to some of the issues, they will not be able to see if we connect. Thank you very much.
Thank you, anybody else who would want to chip in? Alan, do you have anything to say? You have a huge experience of having seen a lot.
I think I want to thank Francis. Yeah, Francis, are you hearing us?
Because audio might be a little, you must have got the gist of the discussions.
Francis, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I speak, I just want a friend of mine sitting next to me also to make a contribution. Yes, and this is just to extol virtues of people who I think decided to stay on course. They have decided to stay in to tell stories about what Africans do and the challenges that they have. Let me say this again before I give the mic to Mekonen. That one of the questions that I'm asked at home in my own home is, what do I do? So how do I tell my brothers what I do? I'm not that superstar that writes big bylines. I'm not that superstar on KBC, on KTN, on NTV. I'm the journalist, one of the journalists, very prominent journalist from my village, is very famous. So when guys look at me, they look at me like, this one we know what he does and we hear him already, but this other one, we really need to know what he does. But then when they press me further, I tell them that I tell stories about the people. And so in terms of saying much on science, I think one of the problems that we have as journalists is to really look for the people-based issues. And whenever we look for those people-based issues, I hear my good friend Vincent saying that he has gotten a report about rice farmers and what have you. It is the same Vincent that also has a nice story about cowpea farmers in Nigeria, where the cowpea farmers could not wait for the government to start their own irrigation system, because they realized the potential of the BT cowpea that they were having was huge, and they're not going to run away from it. And they will not run to the government to help them either to put up systems of irrigation. Cowpea in Nigeria has never been grown under irrigation. To me, those are positive stories by farmers themselves. And so even as we run around in terms of telling the science stories in Africa, most of us are still those excellent journalists who always want to find fault and report on fault. But I would say much more, but let me hear what my good friend from Addis Ababa has to say about the coverage of science issues in Africa. The rain is still beating us. Somebody was saying that there's no longer any gap, but I think that there's that gap that is still need to address.
Thank you again. It's always good to be a neighbor. Huh? So, yes, thank you for the opportunity. So, I think we need to see when we see coverage of climate change, we need to see it at a bigger scale, and we need to see bigger units than and the other problem I see, as a senior journalist, is that we need to find a system or to be systemic, so that we can have, we cannot linking stories, with other issues, health issues. For example, not only human but also animal health. It's unity, and there is a concept called One Health. If you know it, I will know. So when we see climate change, we should see it at a bigger level. And linking it with the different things, with the environment, with human and with even animal health. And also we need to see it beyond our borders, because it's not a local issue. Climate change is a global issue. So when I see drought in the Somali regional state in Ethiopia, we should I should see it also in the perspective of the other border from the Kenyan side or Somali side. So we had last year we had this drought problem in the southern Ethiopia, in what we call locally the Somali regional states. That was connected with Kenyans. That was connected with Somalis. So how I as a journalist, if I see only my local issue, I cannot see it in a broader way. So I don't know if we could find some ways that we could expand it to the cross-border covering of climate change. So these are the issues I can see. So we need to see it at a bigger level, and we need to find it covering it sustainably and systemic in a systemic manner. Yeah, that's my
Yeah.
I also thought that you talk about what he does, which is he has got his own online.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, actually, I do many things. Many things as doing communication work, journalism work, and corresponding for international media, including the Down to Earth and other science media platform in the Europe and America. And we have also with my friends a platform called African Demystifier, a new one. So it's a science and climate change dedicated platform. So I think we need to do that, all of us, and we need to take the stories of climate change and environment at all levels, at a global level. And now, thanks to Down to Earth, we have this opportunity, writing for them, exchanging information between India and Africa. And we have that opportunity now. So thank you very much again.
Right. Thank you. Yes. Minor, please.
So thank you. I think you had used the example of Kenya. From my own observation, there's been somewhere near adequate coverage of climate issues because of events, basically driven by events like drought, because they are very frequent in Kenya and this region operate. And now that we are anticipating El Nino, we don't know when it will happen or what, but the interpretation that in the next maybe few weeks there'll be El Nino rains. Now, the question is whether it's effective, our coverage of climate is effective. And my own way of gauging that is when I listened to when Kenya hosted the African Climate Summit, a lot of that was a topic everywhere. Newspapers, TVs, and radios there. The main issues were African Climate Summit. So I saw politicians trying to travel with explaining what is happening on the importance of the summit, trying to comment on the same. And when I saw them trying to rather than really travel even to get physics terms like climate change, referring it to it as climatic change instead of climate change, I realized that maybe there is a question of effectiveness of coverage of climate change. Because there is two things: there is whether it's adequate or enough, and whether it's effective. And one way of making a topic get well understood and send it to the mouths of everybody is making sure that opinion leaders, and in this case politicians as well, get it well. They understand it and they talk about it. Before you do that, then the common person might not get this concept properly. Because common people, just in Kenya and probably elsewhere in Africa, they tend to listen to politicians very much. So if the politicians understood this concept so well and so is important, and I'm not like I'm trying to politician, I'm talking about opinion leaders. If they grasped it and understood it so well and effectively and regularly talked about it because the effects are there every day for people to see, then probably the other people, the common people would also, their awareness level and knowledge among the common people would also rise. The challenge, one challenge like we pointed out is the terminology, the language, the words. In vernacular languages, even the simple concept of climate change is not easy to explain. In many languages, you may need a sentence just to explain, to translate climate change into some local languages. Those two words, it may be possible that you need a whole sentence to say climate change. Those two words only. So, but I've seen a lot of media houses, outlets, both especially the Swahili ones, they've really tried and come up with the appropriate technologies without having to necessarily use a whole sentence to explain, to say, for example, climate change. The struggle, I think the real struggle is with vernacular stations, and they are really, like you pointed out, getting the terminologies, the words, and like I pointed out earlier, getting the right people to speak about it. Because opinion leaders matter. For everything and anything to trend with my own observation, it needs to be the mouths of opinion leaders. And if they don't understand it, then they will not talk about it. So effectiveness is actually the challenge here. And of course, to some extent, linking the changes climate and where to climate change as a concept.
Good morning. Sorry, I came a bit late, so I may not have heard what my colleagues say, but I believe what they said is the picture of what is happening today. I may say the first story I wrote on climate change, that is many years back, was somewhere in the eastern part of Kenya, where a farmer just said that he was asked, have you seen any changes? And he said, yes, the sun these days, it used to be very far, but now it looks like it's here. And by then, people are still trying to grasp what is this change. But then climate change was a very new terminology. And on America, what I'm trying to say, since then, when the man said that the sun is now seen to be closer, how it was, we've come far. And I think generally is agreeable too. And what I want to say is that I think we also need to come out and what my colleague said about explaining some terminologies. I think for the journalist, including me, I think it's a challenge I'm also trying to myself. We can also venture into writing opinion pieces, and I try and explain these things from your point of knowledge. You can try and explain some of these things. It's a new thing, but I think in Kenya, some journalists are coming up and writing, not just writing the stories, but writing opinion pieces on these issues. The other thing I was trying to also realize in Kenya is that we have, it's encouraging that we have very new journalists coming up, and they're excited about climate change. But the challenge is, a guy comes in a newsroom, writes climate change for 2 years, and then goes. So now we have another new, that's very journalism is. I think consistency helps a lot in writing these issues. And the other thing is on data journalism. I think that has been a bit of a challenge, but it's also coming up where we are now trying to explain these things using data, which I think it's some of the new things that we should be looking at. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Richard wanted to say something, and then.
I think just listening to all of our, we are journalists. In our lifetime, we are looking at once in a century assignment. Could be the longest assignment, and also another assignment which is planetary level. Climate change is definitely, it's our existential story that we are telling. It's the ongoing assignment that we will not escape. Now look at it, I was coming to you, your comment that your editor said that he cares about environment. The biggest environment story we spent 3 years telling you now by this time. That is the COVID. It was a pandemic, whether you are in Kenya, Nigeria, Tanzania, India, anywhere, or in America. Everybody was reporting the same thing. But again, it was a reactive reporting on some things. Those are also important things to know about it, spray it's, all these things. But we all forgot that it was an environmental story. It is the biggest environmental story, which was sought in our plate, and we could never actually report it as an environmental story. First. Second, look at it. Climate change is also a planetary problem. So then where is the question of local and global reporting? Every local story is a global story now. Whether you are telling the story of planetary change, that the climate change from your local story. So basically the framing comes here that every local story has to be framed in the climate or in the global framework. It is as simple as that. In Malawi, a village suffering, a farmer suffering for a drought consistently for 5 years and for Kenya or Eastern Africa. That story should be told in terms of how much emissions people somewhere else emitted, and they warm the climate, and we are paying the things. That's the link actually. That's where the loss and damage. That's where everything comes. Like Chris, yesterday we could not hear him. He reported very clearly El Nino and La Nina. We all have reported when it is needed. But the current study shows that climate change has impacted the events also. So they are not actually giving you where they were supposed to give. La Nina was supposed to have the flood and cooling. We didn't have actually cooling. El Nino is also changing. Yesterday you could have told him that forecasting is. So basically the framing, I think everything is an environment story. The framing has to be now in this climate change perspective. Yeah.
Just keep on address on this point. It's very, very true. Everything we are facing is interconnected. But the challenge is that the journalists are not linking the pieces together. They are telling the environment stories in isolation. That is why you find many times they're not telling the story unless it's a global event like COP and all these things. You find if there's, like now in Kenya, there's El Nino coming, but they're not able to tell the story in a way to show that it's all linked to climate change. Because El Nino and El Nino are natural occurring events, but now because of climate change, they're worsened and now like there's, but we are not contextualizing and just giving all this interconnectedness. That is why you find our stories are not making sense. And then another thing, I'll just like to trust that the Nigerian guys, which is very, very important. Storytelling. We are telling these stories in a way, it is like for the global audience, for the elite. Like a pastoralist in Maasai cannot relate to a climate change story, yet it is affecting them. We had a very serious drought and pastoralists lost like hundreds of their cattle and their source of livelihood. But the way they're telling the stories, they cannot even relate. And it is not even about the terms, because to a farmer, climate change is just basically the rains are now erratic and they are short. To a fisherman, it's about the fishing and there's less fish in the ocean. So once we get it right in how to tell these stories, we will be able to bridge the gap, because you find the information that the people, the local communities have about what they're supposed to do and how they're supposed to react is very little. And even as the journalists, we don't even have how to tell it. So I think that is a big gap that needs bridged. Thank you.
I think, Francis, you have something to say to this. I see your hand up, Francis.
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay, we can hear you.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, the reception here is not good, but after hearing what other colleagues are saying, I decided to give 3 issues. I think I want to divide my presentation into 3 phases. That's looking at the historical perspective of reporting climate change and environment. That is, I think up to early 2000s, then mid 2000s, and now after 2016. I think before 2000, the media in Uganda and I think across Africa depended so much on press releases and events. Then mid 2000s, as journalists acquired more education, master's degrees, and we attracted a number of other professionals into newsrooms, we managed to improve on environment reporting. And that's where we saw a lot of stories being humanized, reporting about issues that affect people and how these climate change or environment issues would affect people, bringing in the human faces into our stories. Then we saw a lot of interpretations, answering the so what question. We saw a lot of investigations during that time. We saw genderization of science stories. Reporters started looking at how these issues, climate change issues, affect women. And we saw greater use of research data. Unfortunately, since the mid-2000s, starting from around 2016, now I'm looking at this as a person who has been in the media for more than 20 years. And speaking from my experience in New Vision, where I work, we have seen reduction in investment in climate and science journalism. Why? Because of the problems we know very well, the reducing revenues, and mainstream media companies have been cost cutting, laying off staff, senior staff, reducing money spent on traveling to cover stories up country, and generally cost cutting on newsroom operations. What has resulted out of this is that we are moving backwards. You don't see a lot of investigations nowadays because media houses don't have the money. And like I said in my first presentation, it used to be newspapers. Newspapers would invest a lot in investigative journalism, in science journalism, because this public interest journalism does not sell, but it would build the credibility of newspapers. And since in our sector we sell credibility, that's how newspapers used to spend a lot of money. Unfortunately, radios don't and TVs don't. So because there is reduction in revenue in newspapers, we are seeing a lot of reduction in public interest journalism, reduction in investigations. And now what this has caused, I think, maybe we have to rethink, is the traditional media still the most important when it comes to covering climate change and environment? I think there is a lot of entrepreneurial journalism in science journalism. Many science reporters are now leaving mainstream traditional newsrooms to start their own online platforms. When I was in Kenya, I managed to talk to a young journalist who told me he had interned in mainstream newspapers like The Nation and Standard, and after failing to get recruited, he started an online platform on climate change. So we are seeing many journalists going into that, but also recently in New Vision, some journalists are leaving, even those who are on staff are leaving to start freelancing for platforms based in US, in America, and the global north. And this has affected our capacity to cover these hard science journalism stories. There's also, as many journalists are moving on to online, there is greater use of multimedia platforms online. You see stories like recently we have an organization called African Center for Media Excellence. It organizes annual journalism awards. The best story that won the environment category had greater usage of multimedia aspects. It had videos, graphics, text, photos, a lot, and that is helping to bring out issues very well. Unfortunately, access to these online platforms is still poor. Many Ugandans, and I think across Africa, people are still dependent on radio, and that now brings up the question: we are at a crossroads. Many journalists are moving onto online. However, many Africans are not accessing what they publish online. These online platforms are read by urbanites, people in urban centers like Kampala. The rural people in the villages don't access these, and therefore they are missing out on this information. I think I wanted to give that historical perspective into this debate. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Godfrey, can I end this question with you and then get on to the very obvious? Okay, I'll come to you. Let me, yeah.
Usually, one of the questions I ask when I do the story is, can you tell language in story without having one language? You know, because I think we have language stories, all of us, everywhere. It affects us every day. So it's really upon us. We don't have to wait for these friends to tell these stories. That if, for example, if you are giving an info today, they are saying a is coming. What does it mean? What does this mean for us? Are we able to do our story in a way that we, all of us, can relate to it in our own spaces? But one of the challenges is that yes, we are really trying to train journalists in such forums on climate change reporting. But we need to go beyond that. When we have these big events, like when we had COVID, for example, everyone reported. Not just left for health journalists, everyone. So what about these other journalists who are, not environment reporters? Do we also target them with these trainings? Because at one time or another, then we need to report it. So we need to expand the space and go beyond just the traditional, environment and climate change reporters. We need to target everyone in these groups. What about editors? Why do they reject stories that, as the reporter, you see, it's a big story, but the editor does not see the story? Training, capacity building. Editors, we also need to bring in editors. In March this year, we had a program measure that was called VCTA, Voices for Just Climate Action. That is targeting, the marginalized, the vulnerable, such what they do. And we realize that it's good for a lot. But when we report about them, we bring them out as victims. But in their own spaces, there are things that they do. Those, little simple interventions that really means a lot. And we need to go down there, get the stories out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would rather be an optimist to look at the glass of water as half full and not necessarily half empty. Oftentimes, when it's time to reflect on the role of journalists when it comes to reporting climate change and environment, you get a feeling that little has been done. But I think from where I stand, a lot has been done. And thank you so much for the historical perspective that you have provided. And I can only speak confident about the Malawi situation. I would say there's quite an improvement for the paper that I work for. We have a dedicated page. So every day we have a human interest story on matters of environment. And again, along the way, I sit on the investigative desk, and we also have an investigative consortium from different media houses. So we meet under one platform, of course, with support from some other interested partners. And within that space, we have realized that for investigative journalism, I think the environment or climate change story is a big, big opportunity. And we've been able to demystify, I think, the popular claim that the environment story does not say about politics. Is exactly how you tell that story. And probably you may not even need to reorient the editors to appreciate how important these stories are. We just need to invest in the journalists themselves to realize how they can tell what seems to be an obviously boring story rather interestingly. I mean, connecting it to the people themselves, they must be able to see a problem. So we must begin from very familiar territory before we get, to those technicalities. Yes, I'm equally worried that we lack terminologies in the local language for these ones, but sometimes what matters is not really the terminologies, but is how you connect the terminologies to what is happening on the ground. It's not well ago. There is a heat wave in Malawi. There is a warning of a winter heat wave in Malawi. And one of the warnings that is coming from the Department of Meteorological Services is that, if you drink alcohol, you must reduce because, alcohol dehydrates and feed a lot of water. And there is one online media that has posted. You see, there are 100 comments, not thousands. Why? They have begun from very familiar things. Of course, some people are commenting about, alcohol, but eventually people are getting the message. And that is a climate change story without mentioning one. We have produced in Malawi what we call a deforestation dossier. So we are also trying to thematize our coverage on environment. What is more pertinent, or what should we begin, what should we focus on? So my paper, I think 2 years ago, had an investigative piece which simply looked at something that is obvious that my brother Vincent talked about, the issue of charcoal. But this time around, we're simply looking at the corruption that happens in charcoal. So where one of our journalists spent at least a considerable time in the field, he was actually monitoring where people make all this charcoal. So we're able to hire trucks, to move with the charcoal, passing through all the roadblocks until we got to the city where it is sold. It was actually, with the secret cameras, it was actually to show how corruption is also leading to deforestation, how corruption is a problem in the environmental aspect. We captured police officers, forest officers on cameras, and a good number of them are under prosecution. That is still a climate change story. It was popular, and our paper sold like hot cake. So if you check again, sounding the alarm, Malawi's forests are on the brink. It's an investigative dossier where journalists from different media houses have come up together and do very comprehensive stories. Of course, I know mine. I think we talked about how forests are burning while smoke-free policies are piling. So it was simply meant to look at what government is doing in terms of policy. And we have very good policies, which is not implemented. So in that way, we are able to see the huge benefit that is coming because of the climate change story. And you'd rather do this story than anything else because people are beginning to see the evils or the problems of climate change. This is just Malawi, but I think if you look globally, again, the environment story has provided a huge opportunity for investigative journalism. In 2020, I was sitting in a panel of judges for One World Media awards, the annual awards that are given to different media houses. I was very shocked because each time I read, I was on the environmental category as a judge. We were 5 of us across different countries. Each time I read an entry from one of the international media houses, I thought this was a winning story until I went to the second one. And you see, it was a learning process. I think that's why I came to know about the gas landfill somewhere in India, then the problem of India's, man-eating tiger, stories told beautifully in terms of the coexistence between wildlife and human beings. So I'm just thinking we must also embrace, investigative journalism, which gives us an opportunity to be relevant because we know you think the he said, she said kind of a story is becoming boring. So for where we are on print as well as on online, and only investigative journalism is giving us, an edge. So every day, I can assure you, we are telling an environmental story, and we have that deliberate connection, just to remember what she's saying. When we talk about hunger, when there are figures from whichever agency that 4.5 million people in Malawi, or 20% of the population who face hunger due to drought, we find a way to connect that to climate change. So that people should begin to appreciate. So when there are floods and people at a camp where they're given support, we can tell funny stories of sexual starvation where men are separated from their wives because they're at the camp, and therefore the marital privileges may not be there. So you pick one man who is complaining, it's now been a week, I haven't seen my wife, but still you find a way of connecting that to the bigger climate change story. So it may not really have to be, I'm doing a climate change story, environment story, but everything around us, it could be economics, business, politics. We must link it for people to find those relevance, how critical climate change and environment issues are. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I think, yeah.
Thank you very much. I would like to appreciate most of the issues that are raised from various parts of the continent and how interlinked they are, even to us in Zimbabwe. But what I'm realizing are some of the gaps amongst the media in Africa is we need to be doing more sharing, sharing of the news and climate issues. For instance, is raising a very pertinent issue of charcoal in Malawi, but to some extent it doesn't appreciate that this is cross-bounded. Some of the charcoal from Malawi ends up in Zimbabwe. Most of the charcoal from Mozambique ends up in Zimbabwe. Some even pass down to South Africa and Botswana. So the most important aspect that we need to do as well is to see how we can connect, how we can link up and bring out the bigger story, let's say on charcoal. How we link and share that information is quite critical. Another important gap that I saw is when it comes to climate change issues. We have this perception as journalists that people in rural areas, people in remote parts don't know what is happening. But you'll be surprised at the amount of local innovation that are going on at local level. that we need to bring out. You go to some parts, you see how people are coping their own without NGO support, without government support. People understand climate issues at their own level. And we need to bring out stories about innovations at local level. Because at times we think that innovations have to come from outside, but people are adapting and copying their own. That's one aspect that we need to also bring out. The other issue is also to do with students. I'm glad that most colleges and universities have now taken up climate change as a course in Zimbabwe and most other countries in the region. So I think this needs to be supported as well. And then the other aspect has to do with the innovations that are coming out of our universities. At times, most journalists, when there is a research week or some innovation showcase in universities, we hardly go there. But when you go there, for instance, I went at the University of Zimbabwe Innovation Week, the amount of work that is being done to try and find solutions to some of the issues related to climate change, like solar technologies on how to solar banks, they are researching on how they can use solar to treat tobacco. And because deforestation is largely driven by the tobacco industry. So we are seeing some initiatives that are coming out of our local universities. And now as my sister raised the point, how do you connect that to the bigger story of climate change? That's where we are missing the point. And the other most important issue that I also wanted to raise on how do we sustain the interest on climate related stories? How do we bring people to remain interested throughout the years or at most of the times, not at the peak periods like the big events like the COP, or when the president is speaking about climate change? That's when it comes on page one, for instance, in our country. That's the trend. But how do we sustain the interest on climate issues? How do we sustain these issues to remain relevant to the people so that we shape the debate around climate change issues? And these issues are transboundary. They're no longer, it doesn't know any border. And how do we link? Like, for instance, my colleague from Malawi, how do we link with my colleague from Zambia? Let's say on an El Nino is also hitting Southern Africa this time around. How do we link with a colleague to write a bigger story on the impacts? Thank you.
Thank you. We are kind of running out of time. Let me go to the next two questions. I can combine the two because we have already started talking about the community members yesterday. We can come back to the discussions with the yeah. Oh, yes. Yeah. So the two questions that remain that we wanted to bring to our panelists, to all of you, was how can the newsroom be updated and equipped with critical knowledge to make our coverage of climate change not just adequate but also effective. A lot of the discussions that have happened in the past half an hour, 1 hour or so have been centered around that. And following with that question is again something that we have been talking about yesterday. How can we collaborate among media platforms across the continent and with us in India to take up the high impact reporting for our influence? Can I ask Godfrey to begin on this? Godfrey?
Thank you. We need to appreciate that we are coming with someone safe. And spaces such as media associations that's what Measure is doing. Such needs also. I'll give you I use my own example. Before I started editing Science, I was what we call a proper political editor. Yeah, I think laws are in politics. I was able to that. And I didn't imagine that I would not transition into when I got looking for the first time, I said I can't do this. Because this sounds just complex, I don't even understand. But about it. It's stuck on this. He said you have to do this. And so through learning, I am now able to call myself, science editor. So this continuous training through because media houses, the formal media houses as we know them, they still see themselves in terms of competition. In this day and age, we can still talk about scooping someone. I don't know if that still happens. So to get media houses to join hands and to train journalists, for example, together, it's not that easy. Yeah. So if we get into these spaces, like what CSE is doing, the Measure, and we get more support across, across the continent, across the globe, it will go a long way in building these capacities. But there is something also, media, especially in Kenya, media depend a lot on advertisement revenue as the main source of revenue to run the media houses. But that has been, it's not going down. And actually, media houses are suffering, they are struggling to stay afloat. Every day you hear there's cost cutting, there is being laid off. So when you tell them that you need a section on, for example, on environment, they will ask you, will it bring in money? That's the first question. Because now the money issue is a serious issue. But there's something that is already being done, like national media is doing it. It's called partnership journalism. Partnership journalism is where you get a partner. Yes, they're doing something. It's related to what we call advertorials. What we call advertorials. It's closely related to that. That let's say WHO has a project that they are running that is, affecting the people, of course, and they want this story is told. So the media, they approach the media approaches them, they say, all right, let us run this program together. You fund us, we tell those stories. And tell it in a human interest way, in a journalistic way. It's not advertising. If we can, if this can be expanded, if other media houses can adopt this, I think it's a better way to push on them, but also tell these stories too. Then cross-border, in Measure we have something called cross-border cafes, where we bring journalists together from, let's say, Uganda, Malawi, to learn from each other. So these cross-border trainings and platforms, we need to have more of them. I think that is now where journalism is headed. Yes.
Thank you. Helen, do you want to add that?
Yes, I'd like to add to that. Just from the way the discussion is going on in the plenary and in the participants, there's agreement that journalists have tried. The little resources we have, the little knowledge we have, the little challenges we have, really we have tried to do our best to tell the climate change story. So what I'm feeling is that we just need to go to the next level. Like my brother, I think from my brother had said, how do we sustain this conversation, this narrative of climate change so that we don't get fatigued? I'll give you an example. When COVID happened, we used to report stories on COVID every day. COVID, these people have died, people. We reached a point where there was COVID fatigue. People were tired of hearing COVID news, and we had to just stop and start giving fresh information. There's something about the audience. So even with this climate change, because we might reach a point where there's fatigue now. People see a climate change story, they just switch off. So how do we start telling this story so that we don't bore people? How do you tell it in a fresh, new way so that they see the need? Because there's still a problem and there's still work that needs to be done. So what I'm thinking, and Mesha is very passionate about it and doing trainings on it, is that we need to start doing solution journalism. You cannot just start doing a story about what drought has killed all these people, all these floods that kill all these people, and then what next? As journalists, we owe it to our audience to just give them hope. So you need to wire your story in a way you don't leave the audience hopeless. There's climate change, it's killing everybody, and what next? So you have to tell your story in such a way that you leave hope. So it has to have a solution. So where the solutions come, you all have been talking about it. The innovative things that communities are doing, marginalized communities are doing innovative stuff. The women, the youth, all these stories, we need to start telling them so that it is not a boring story that people are tired of. Another thing we need to do, and Dobogo has touched on it, I just want to address, is the need for collaboration. I don't know what other countries, but in Kenya, like the top media houses, they see each other as competition. But climate change is a problem that is tying all of us, and we cannot see it as competition. We need to start working together collaboratively. I'll give you an example. When Kenya was banning 2007, 2008, there was post-election violence. It was so bad, the violence, that media houses agreed we have to have one headline, all of us. All the newspapers the next day had one headline: save our country. It was impactful. The politicians toned down, the country cooled down, and we saw that it was possible for newsrooms to work together. So even before we start collaborating as Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda, we need to start collaborating as newsrooms in our countries. We stop seeing each other as competitors, but see a way that we can collaborate together. And we can also collaborate together now, border-wise. Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, there are issues that face us. Like for us, Kenya and Uganda, there's Lake Victoria. It is a problem, and there's usually conflict between because of this link. So there's a way that newsrooms can start doing joint stories, so that stories don't just look like, oh, it's a Kenyan issue, it's an Ugandan issue. It is an issue that is cutting across, and it is linked to climate change. Thank you.
Richard, I'll come to you, but let me see Francis is there. Francis, are you there?
Yes, please. Yes, unfortunately. Unfortunately.
Yes.
Yes, I'm hearing. Unfortunately, I moved to a place which is not good for the camera, but I like what the last presenter has shared. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, we can.
Okay, I was saying that I like what the last presenter has mentioned, that we need collaboration, we need to focus on solutions and tell stories from the people's perspective, how they are trying to devise solutions to climate change, especially now that most villages are going into solar powered irrigation. Those are things we need to emphasize. But I think climate change is also looked at from a global to a local perspective, and usually we have highlighted in our reporting the global issues discussed at the global level. I think now it's high time we emphasize the local, go into our villages, go into our small towns to highlight these issues and give diverse perspectives, talk to indigenous people, the underrepresented voices. These are voices we need to bring into our stories. But also the other issue that we need to I wanted to highlight is audience engagement. Encourage audiences to interact with our stories through asking them to comment on our stories through forums. We can also do some when we, for instance, we publish a story, we need to highlight to put it on social media, ask so that people can comment on it. That audience engagement. I think as climate change or environment reporters and media houses, there is also need to build a strong network. Mesha is trying to do this, and it's commendable. I think we need to make it a little bigger and share data on climate change and do like what the previous speaker said, stories that cut across. When I was in Kenya, there is a gentleman from Nation Media who said he had failed to pursue a story on dying rivers. And I remember that story idea. I thought if we can come up with we can establish a media consortium on climate change that cuts across different countries, we could come up with such stories like dying rivers in sub-Saharan Africa, for instance, and the media house in Uganda can pursue the dying rivers in Uganda, then another one in Kenya like that. And because of the challenges we have, may not be able to fund such stories, but I'm sure there are non-profit agencies that would provide funding for that. That's the point of having joint projects and investigations. That would be good. Then we need to build capacity. I said in my last presentation that a lot of journalists are leaving newsrooms, and new media houses are now cutting costs, not renewing contracts of senior journalists. Right now, I have a team of young people whom I have to train, and environment and climate change or science journalism in general is not an easy topic for journalists because most of us come from the humanities side. So it's not, so we need to emphasize continuous training to build capacity in science reporting. Then on top of that, there is an organization called One something, Women in News. They have been they have been going to different countries, and their agenda is to promote gender balance in newsrooms and the reporting. So if we get more serious in Africa and India, we come up with a consortium and ensure that we also become so active. Because what Women in News is doing, they are even encouraging newsrooms to develop editorial policies that bring in the gender perspective. Now, can we have editorial policies in different African newsrooms, Indian newsrooms that guarantee, that talk about environment and climate change and science journalism in general, so that because these are topics or bits that affect humanity. Environment, if the environment is destroyed, it touches everyone. These are topics that touch everyone's life. So we need to mainstream environment, climate change reporting in editorial policies and standards. The other point I wanted to make is I've noted it here. Cross promotion of each other's media, each other's content. If, for instance, what the leader said is that we are not competing against each other. If there is a serious investigation nation has done in Kenya, because climate change cuts up, what affects Kenyans will affect Ugandans, will most likely affect Nigerians. El Nino is coming and it's predicted that it's going to hit across it's going to hit East Africa. Recently, a nation in Kenya had a serious discussion on El Nino, which was aired live on NTV Uganda and NTV Kenya. But we need as media houses to understand that we are not competing when it comes to these issues that affect human beings. We are not competing. If there is a discussion like that, can we find a way of having it across our TV stations, for instance, or radio stations, or having joint stories that run, for instance, in Nation, Standard, but similar stories? Can we think about that as media houses? You have one story on a day, you discuss that. Now we are going to highlight this issue. Let's develop this story together. Let's have it in Nation. Let's have it in Standard on that same day. I think that would also create impact. It's so that when a person reads, buys only Standard, doesn't miss out on the story in Nation. I think that would also be good. So far, that's what I can say. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Francis. We are a little beyond the time that we spoke. So I will request Richard to round it up, and then we can, continue the discussion. We have tea after this. We are all here together. Richard?
Just to, I think, round up this questions are very much relevant and more targeted as us. And one is that coming up very clearly how outdated it is. There is no accepting the fact that you need to be updated with climate change, and that can only come from more interactions with scientists, social scientists, economists, and among ourselves. We react, we tell the stories very well. But what the stories actually tell, the message comes from the scientists. We need to do that. Suppose a study comes, say for example, state of Africa environment, this report says that desertification is highest ever in Africa. All your stories you must have reported desertification, like whether in Nigeria, in Madagascar, or anywhere. But when they come together and tell you, it's basically saying that the whole continent is under desertification. So that the story basically tell you another story. And what's that collaborations that you do. Second issue about what kind of collaborations? This is the time of collaborative journalism. Because yes, we are professional journalists, that's our livelihood. But also we have a responsibility. It's a planetary crisis, and there is nothing global, all the crises are global now. We need to actually come together to mount actually global scale reporting or reportage of investigative. It would be as for example, yesterday we discussed about the carbon credit. Now suddenly this is coming as a big solution to the biggest problem. How to offset carbon, and we saw 2 reports we discussed. But suppose if you go for across the continent, among all the countries, and we actually mount and report on how the carbon credit mechanism is being rolled out, what is the experience with the local communities, what is the mechanism? So that one. Similarly, the collaboration, as you look at it, the nature doesn't have a boundary, not the climate is bound. Like it's Africa, it says that. If the Indian monsoon, we find it becomes erratic, it impacts Africa as well. If the Arctic is melting, it's in fact Africa is not just Asia and any other continent. So basically, collaboration in journalism, in mounting a more expansive information dissemination. That's need of the hour. And as you pointed out, I think our own news should come together without actually compromising our individual independence. And also more and more stories being told in other languages, where we can make our stories relevant to be read by other people. Like we have multiple languages and that can be also taught. So basically to say that at this time of this crisis, where the story has to be told, including your solution parts. Like the biggest solution story could be the Africa continent itself. And the biggest victim story could also be told from the Africa. Not emitting a single extra greenhouse gas in the Pacific. But at the same time, protecting this kind of biodiversity and still becoming the largest sink of carbon, you are a solution story. So, but the framing of the story has to be wide. And second, it has to be bigger collaborations, more and more collaboration among us to tell a single story in intercontinental scale.
Thank you. Yesterday, when we were discussing in the evening with Agan and all of us around here, there was something that had struck me and which Agan and we have been discussing for a while. In terms of how we can, motivate and train young journalists from Africa as well as India in the newsroom, in down to earth and in CSE perhaps. It might be difficult to do a physical training of that sort, but what came to my mind was, many of you here are very senior journalists in your organizations. Can we develop a mentorship program where, for instance, if there is, civil army, he handpicks one or two, young journalists from his team, and with him, same, I would say about Chittagong, Vincent is there. There is Helen over here. Maybe we could come together to create what we were talking about, a platform where, the young as well as the senior journalists and some of us from India who can provide the content and perhaps some of the platforms as well. We create a group where we talk to them. These young people would be promising, and this is where we start building them up for positions later on. Because, I have been working with media for a long time, and in India, very interestingly, CSE and down to earth, we now have certain senior journalists in very reputed organizations and media houses who have been with us, networking with us, training with us, ever since they were, either reporters or principal correspondents. Now they are group editors. So, and they do not, they do not come from a science or environment background. We have had editors who were, reporting crime. We have had editors who were reporting politics or environment. So we have worked with them over a number of years and built them up, and we have seen very good results there. That is how nurturing has happened. That's a case in point in India. Something like that, maybe if we could work out here. These are the people who will go on to World Street and get the ball. We will need your help. A lot of you are in very good positions in your respective organizations. We will need your help to build that group of young people. We have already crossed the time, and we requested Arlani to take it a little further. But maybe we could continue discussing as we have tea. Tea has been served. If you have any issues, please feel free to speak up in the meantime. The mic is here. Thank you, our speakers. Thank you so much. And we will be in touch for doing this discussion.